If we were to be brutally honest with ourselves, we would be able to recognize that we all live inside of our own loops of perception, perspective, and projection. Whether it's for a millisecond, an hour, a day, a week, a month, a lifetime, even if it's only temporary and we're able to expand into a higher density spiral of thought and awareness, those loops will still always appear, and that nothing or no one is immune to this universal truth. Therefore, in my opinion, everything that's been created is inherently fallible. And it's why I feel that consuming information without putting it into action for yourself to see if what you are ingesting is true or wise makes you dense, not knowledgeable. And I believe this is why I personally, to date, have not and cannot seem to subscribe or go all in on any religious or spiritual truth, because my innate curiosity and life experience has always shown me the limitations, dangers, and pitfalls that can happen when I don't do my own due diligence. And then I usually end up entering, adopting, teaching, adhering, or rejecting relationships, beliefs, and ideologies from an inexperienced, ungrounded, and unregulated space. And it's usually within these lessons that my wobbly self-trust is revealed, and I get to view through a new lens various forms of intuitive interference. Within the landscape of religion and spirituality, there is what I feel to be an inherent bypassing around the ideas of equity and value, because we tend to reach for books or scripture or other man-made constructs to look for coded clues or answers without truly taking the time to also review and analyze how those initial teachings evolved into present-day realities, and then question if they were constructed to harm or help. Like, are we looking at our key to freedom, or are we looking at the manual of enslavement? Which one is it? And I'm asking because I don't have the answer. I'm a firm believer that in order to not repeat a cycle, pattern, or outcome, you must be willing to cultivate an intimate relationship with how it was created in the first place. And this rings true both in our inner and outer worlds. Much of my learning has come through the act of reverse engineering outcomes. So even in my corporate life, whether it was interior design, systems design, organizational design, I always had to start with the vision of an intended outcome and work backwards through the creation process. And the same is true for the deeper inner work that I do. My reality didn't just appear overnight. It was constructed thought by thought, word by word, action by action over the entirety of my life and beyond, if we want to get into ancestry and epigenetics. But what does that look like? I can't know where I'm going if I don't know where I've been. So if we want to look at financial systems, which happens to be at the core of our conversation today, millions of men and women around the world work day in and day out with the entire blueprint of our financial structure at their fingertips. Now, maybe not it in its entirety, but at least a piece of it. They are an active participant and cog in the creation of our financial reality. But so long as you never halt and attempt to understand, understand, and overstand what you're doing, why you're doing it, what ripple effect your sweat equity has on the world, this evolutionary and liberating knowledge will remain hidden in plain sight. This is why I love having conversations with men and women who have had one foot in the corporate world and another in the spiritual world, who have allowed their curiosity to allow them to question what it is that they're participating in, while also finding ways to take this lived experience and knowledge that's been garnered inside of these systems, reverse engineer it, and then attempt to weave new solutions. through the wisdom that's been garnered. Meet Allison, a writer, speaker, and healer. She's the founder of Victoria Le Aelius, a consultancy focused on empowering our collective economic transition, economic advisor to Atlas, a revolutionary biospheric design center for city and naturescapes, and founder of Metamorphosis, a 7-week paradigm shift program. Allison's unique ability to see and shift energetic structures was catapulted by 2 near-death experiences and a ski accident that broke her back. She guides her clients to live the impossible. Previously, she was global editor-in-chief of DebtWire ABS, a proprietary news service for stakeholders and decision-makers who sought solutions for failing asset prices and debt forgiveness in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. Allison studied the global implementation of anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism financing policy in the years following September 11, 2001. At the Oregonian, Allison was the first Jim Long investigative reporting intern, a position in which she researched the development and enforcement of EPA standards for the land application of sewage sludge. As an editor-in-chief of the Daily Barometer, Oregon State University's student newspaper, Allison was the first journalism student to receive the Society of Professional Journalists' First Freedom Award for a series of reports concerning allocation of university funds. The SPJ voted the newspaper as #1 best all-around daily in the nation during her tenure. Allison was one of a handful of student journalists selected to study the Middle East conflict in Israel, Bulgaria, and Poland. Allison has studied energetic expression through language and DNA extensively in Şanlıurfa, Turkey, Oroville, India, and at Sela in Dalvik, Iceland. I was initially introduced to Allison through her writing on Substack, where she has a brilliant publication called The Great Debt Repatriation. And as soon as I read it, I knew I needed to reach out to her because she was expressing a deeply held and embodied knowledge of the financial system, while also inherently understanding our self-accountability and responsibility for creating it. Now, before we dive into our conversation, this is the point where I ask you, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the Grand Rising Experience wherever you're listening, or at grandrisingexperience.substack.com. It not only allows these valuable stories to reach those who need to hear them, it allows other unicorns in the world to find me so that we can bring you these stories in the first place. You can also head over to NicoleConnor.com to learn more about the portal, the membership, and upcoming summits that you can attend both virtually and in person. As always, thank you so much for being here. I love you. Let's dive in.
Oh, it's been a week. It's been a really intense week energetically, on top of a very intense week last week. Someone who worked not directly with me, but a colleague years ago passed away she was 50 something, in her early 50s. It was sudden. And I just woke up really with the message of how important it is to be loving as in our greatest capacity, to love one another and have compassion. That's what I wrote about yesterday. That's what I ended up writing about. Is I was on a call about economics, and we were talking about trusts, and someone asked me what a trust was. And I said, well, actually, the trust is the community itself. The trust is the community. The trust is humanity. Right? I had a friend asking me about trust also yesterday. That how do you trust someone? And on reflecting on that, I realized that in everything I've been through, there was always someone there. There was always someone there. And to me, that is trust. It's really trusting in myself. It's trusting in myself that there will always be another human there. And they may not show up in the form that I want. They may not say the things that I even want them to say, but someone is always there. And that to me is trust. And when I allow myself to deepen into that level, it is that much easier to show up with the compassion, with the love that I truly desire to show up with in every moment of my life. That's what I woke up to this morning, just in reflecting and just really tapping into where I perceive a lot of the energy moving through people right now. When we do go through massive shifts and changes, and we are led to question, what do we trust? You know, we trust ourselves, right? Ultimately, and we trust in God. We trust that we as God are always bringing toward ourselves everything that we need in that moment. It's always there. We do have free will to reject it, right? We can reject it, but it will always show up. It will always show up for us. That's on my heart.
That's beautiful and incredibly deep and poignant and relevant to the solution that is within our grasp to reach for right now, in terms of how we ail a lot of what is harming humanity at the moment. I'm so sorry to hear about your friend who passed. You're right about the love, and you're right about the trust. In my experience over the past few years, going through the pandemic, looking at parallel societies, looking at what new systems could potentially emerge from the ashes of what's happening, trusts were actually at the forefront of what I had been digging into. And it was really interesting because something that was starting to bubble up in the economic system was, if you want to protect your assets, if you want to protect your family, you need a trust. You need to be able to build these trust structures. And this was happening kind of in the, what I like to call the private realm. So you had the public, you had the private, and a lot of these sovereign groups were really diving heavy into trust structures. And a lot of the trust structures that were being created, they were being done so with the understanding of the commerce system that we're kind of structured under, and lex mercatoria, which is merchant law, but also under a lot of biblical principles. And it was really interesting because through that whole process, it's really when I had to take a beat and kind of step back from the work that I was doing, because I'm like, whoa, you can't have trust without trust. Because in order to build a trust, you have to be able to have a beneficiary, a trustee, and an executor. And in order to have those other appointments, you need to have a deep level of trust, but you can only trust others as deeply as you can trust yourself. So what does that begin to look like? And then I started really going very deep within around the concept of trust, and kind of came up with like a little pain pyramid that I say, like, before you can rise, you have to halt. And HALT stands for honesty, acceptance, loyalty, and trust. And kind of that ladder that you climb in order to be able to get to that unyielding, unshakable trust, which I believe is our life mission, really to be able to truly be so present in the moment with ourselves, to be able to walk in faith that there is something larger than us that is guiding us in our greatest and highest good. But that's a really hard place to get to. And God knows I can't sit there all the time. Like, there's so many external factors that are always coming in to try and show us that we can't trust. But it's only through that space of trust that we really do start to appreciate, not even appreciate, I don't like that word, that we truly can embody the peace and the love that keeps us in that state of trust. I find it so fascinating. And when I read your article yesterday about trust, I was like, okay, there it is. It's showing up again. It really does come down to trust.
It does. Yeah, it does. And I love what you said about, we can only trust another the degree to which we trust ourselves. That is so true. That is so true. And I feel like the more that we allow ourselves to be in the moment, the more that we allow ourselves to be in the moment and allow the propensity of the mind to bring us into the past or project us into the future, we empower that trust. That's been another huge theme that's really been coming forward for me over the last few months, is the awareness that the mind's operating system, if you will, of dredging forward the past and trying to project an expectation into the future based on our definitions, right? Based on our definitions, based on what we perceive a particular experience to be. I feel like a lot of times we hold those as memories, right? We hold those as our memories, and we say, these are precious to me, right? We seem to have an intrinsic awareness that memories are important, right? But what I've realized over the last few months is that these are not our memories. These are not our memories. These are merely a series of definitions, a series of experiences that have been filtered through our own perception. What our memories actually are is the movie reel, if you will, that's playing out in front of us. We are already living, we are already immersed in memory. We are already living in our Akashic records right now. And the more that we allow these definitions, this program, to be a filter, be an overlay, call it an analytical overlay to our experience, the more that we might be whittling away that trust, right? Because we are really relying on a program to try to guide us into what is our next step, what is safe, right? What is reliable? Well, what is always going to show up as reliable is the exact same patterns that you've always been in, right? You will project in that program, you will always project the same patterns over and over and over, because that is what will feel safe. That is what will feel reliable. That is what will be perceived as trust. When really we have this beautiful canvas of all life to experience, and we are already in our memories, and we will never lose them. We will never lose them. So that awareness, it's really been rooting within me to a greater and greater degree within the last few months. And that awareness is, to me, extremely powerful in allowing the last bits of that definition making device to kind of fall away, right? To allow even more presence.
That was definitely an awareness that I was stepping into. It was approximately a year ago when I was like, I don't know if I can see myself in the work that I'm doing right now. And I said that phrase, and it actually created this wild domino effect in my life. I had no idea when I said this out loud that it was going to create this domino effect. But it was probably by the fall of last year that I was like, okay, Nicole, there's nothing to protect or defend. So what are you doing right now? And if I'm trying to protect or defend something, I'm living in a future that hasn't happened. I'm living in a past that has some element of trauma attached to it. What am I creating from those spaces? And am I actually birthing into being something that is stable and healthy and wise that I can move through this life in? Or am I recreating this pattern that we've been stuck in subconsciously because I'm trying to create an escape hatch that soothes those programs within me that wants to keep me in this loop of like perception, perspective, and projection, where you just kind of loop in this circle, not even necessarily realizing it. And it's like, okay, how is my environment reflecting this back to me? Like, how have I padded my environment to allow these perceptions, perspectives, and projections to continue?
Yes.
And what happens if I just step into the present moment, just look around and feel the innate safety that I have right now, regardless of what I'm hearing, what I'm being told to be true. Like when I am truly in my body in the moment, I'm safe. And that is like deep deconditioning that we have to really consciously want to explore for ourselves. And um, there's a quote that I keep hearing, and I think it's by Dr. Tommy John. He's a chiropractor in the US. When it comes to healing, it's like there's only two options. It's like you didn't know you could or you don't want to. And it's something that I think about often because I'm like, okay, like what is showing up subconsciously that's trying to keep me in fear, scarcity, lack, fight, flight, fawn, freeze? And is it true? Is it real? I like that you were talking about memories because I know there's been studies done psychologically that when you remember something, you're not actually remembering it as it happened. You're remembering the last time you remembered it. So our memory is inherently faulty, which is why like eyewitness testimonies are faulty because our nervous system, I've actually called the nervous system like the Akashic record of our being, the internet of our being. It just pulls what feels good and what feels safe. It never pulls what's necessarily true. So we're so speaking the same language, and it's so refreshing to be able to have a conversation like this because it feels a little radical. It feels a little audacious to have these conversations, but I think they're so necessary, and it is what is coming up in the collective right now to be shared so that it can be cleared.
Yes, I love that. It's I wanted to touch on these feedback loops. So something that came up in writing this week was that I was writing a lot about time and how time is experienced and what time is. And I was reading this German psychologist, or he's a former psychologist. He researches time, and he said time is humanity. Time is the human body, and it's like, yeah, time is the human body. Time is created through all of these chemical interactions in the human body, and when we are in a feedback loop. So let's say most people have, quite a few feedback loops, but let's just talk about one. Most of us are not in just one feedback loop, but let's just talk about one. You are in a constant feedback loop. So let's say you get up every day and you go to a job that you don't like, and that's the feedback loop we're going to talk about. So you get up every day, you go to a job that you do not like, but you really don't feel like you are empowered to shift that experience, right? Like you had the moment where you let go of that particular feedback loop and you empowered yourself to shift that experience. But if you don't do that, what ends up happening is that the experience itself begins to take energy from you. So the more that you engage in that particular feedback loop of feeling like you, quote unquote, have to go to that job for all of the reasons that your mind is providing you, you will begin to feel more and more and more depleted. You will begin to feel some of these emotions of maybe resent, sadness, that might ultimately lead to a feeling of depression or even apathy, right? And that's where people get into a state of being an autopilot. They get into a state of being zombie-like, of feeling like they are so rooted in this routine that it becomes who they are, right? That job becomes an intrinsic part of who they are. And within the body, this is true. Within the body, this is true because that feedback loop, that experience has become so rooted I could almost say that it becomes parasitic in the sense that it is literally eating at your own life force energy. It is consuming you. And that's where we end up with cellular deterioration. That's where we end up with aging. That's how we end up with the experience of feeling like we're getting older. We're not really getting older. We're actually just, our cells are deteriorating. We're not at our optimal luminosity. We are not shining that light, which is our free will, through our bodies at our greatest capacity, because we are allowing something to have dominion over us. And in this case, it's a feedback loop, right? So we become like a chemical battery that is looping and looping and looping and looping. And we know what a chemical battery does when it fully depletes. It just kind of, well, it becomes very acidic, doesn't it? It sort of deteriorates. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. So this, I feel, is really paramount to where we are headed in our perception of time. Why we feel like sometimes time is moving very slowly. I mentioned that often if I ask someone how their day is going and they answer by telling me how many hours they have left in their day, they're probably in a feedback loop, right? They're probably in a state of powerlessness over that pattern that they've engaged in for many years. When we begin to consciously time travel, we become very aware of the varying levels of density that exist within our experience. So we might be one day in the middle of an experience that unconsciously we have engaged in every single day our entire lives. And all of a sudden, maybe we feel that density. Maybe we feel the density of it. We become conscious to it for the first time. And that's a gift. A lot of people call this a dark night of the soul, or they call it a breakdown, or they call it something else. And maybe it is. But ultimately, it's a gift because you are being provided the opportunity to shift. Right. And that's where I really wonder. That's where I really wonder. Like my mom said to me yesterday, when I was in the middle of writing about trust, she said, she just brought up people that don't feel pain. And she said, I was reading this article about people who don't feel pain and they don't live very long. She said they don't live very long because they don't feel pain. And so they don't understand what they're doing to their bodies. And I was like, that's perfect. I'm going to use that in my writing right now. It was a perfect segue because right, it's feeling that what we perceive to be pain, it's feeling that pain that allows us to shift the behavior, right? It allows us to shift the behavior. So I found that to be really, really enlightening. I found it to be really enlightening. I just feel like these topics are so present right now. I feel they are so present for each of us on an, I've certainly experienced it many times on an individual level. And when we look outward to what we are collectively projecting, in the system, someone was asking me yesterday, it's like, how much longer will we be in this transition period? I said, I do not know. I have the same question myself. How much longer? Really, I feel that's up to each and every one of us. It's the extent to which we shift our own patterns within.
I mean, I feel right now like I am experiencing a very different reality than most people. I have an elevated level of peace in my life that I'm not seeing actively reflected back to me in my community, which is interesting. So then I also become very aware in every interaction that I'm having that I'm holding a frequency that is medicinal in a certain way, because I'm able to create that reflection tool that allows someone to relax, and I can watch tension drop in their shoulders, and I can watch it relax in their face, and I see it in their eyes. And it's just so interesting because I'm literally not able to engage in a lot of the conversations that people seem to be having because I'm just not paying attention to what's happening in the media, what's being conjured outside of us. I'm just not paying attention to it. So I can't engage in it. So the conversations that I have are incredibly different. And that feels in itself like a blessing. It's just this really interesting time right now. And I thought it was timely that you were talking in your article about pain, because when I read it, I chuckled yesterday because just before I had this grand awakening, I really couldn't feel the depth of my own pain physically, in the sense that I was going through severe burnout and my back, like I was literally being crippled emotionally through the pain that I was having physically. And it was through the unlayering of my emotional pain that I was able to heal this physical pain. And something I've been reflecting on a lot recently are these kind of third-party systems that we place throughout society to numb that pain and to attempt to mitigate it. And something that we see from like a financial perspective that happens in the workplace is, as you said, people show up day in and day out to a job that they don't like. One, because they're caught in a feedback loop. Two, because there are stories around intrinsic value and worth and how they're able to find their abundance to maintain their lifestyle. And the other one that's been coming up a lot for me lately is insurance. And there's a huge rabbit hole you can go down with insurance and what the definition of insurance is and how we bring in these third parties to mitigate risk because we refuse to take the level of responsibility and accountability that's required to not need to be able to hand that to a third party. But inside of these workspaces, people are getting incredibly ill for many reasons. And a lot of it has to do with the disease that gets caused in the body through these feedback loops. But then you get to numb it through the insurance policy that is part of your benefit package that further keeps you stuck and stagnant inside of these places. And I've worked in the insurance industry as well, and have firsthand experience and knowledge of exactly how those policies are psychologically used to further enslave people inside of these systems that are inherently self-destructive.
Yeah, I think that we are, as a human species, we are wonderful engineers, and I think that we will create many devices to avoid feeling pain, right? To avoid feeling pain, maybe to avoid taking responsibility, though there really is no avoidance, right? There is amplification. There is amplification, which, something I've realized also, synonymous with these feedback loops. It's like the longer that I stay, if I were in a job that were difficult, it's like the longer that I stay in that job, every turn, every cycle, let's say the cycle is a day. It's like every day that I return to that job, that feedback loop is coming back toward me. Maybe that you can think of it as every day that I were to walk out that door, I'm sending out an arrow. Let's say I'm sending out an arrow, which is my intention to force myself to go into a situation that my body is screaming no. My body is screaming no, and yet some aspect of me is sending out an arrow. Well, that arrow always returns, right? Intentions are ultimately frequencies. They are cymatics. Cymatics are structures. So there's always a return. There's always a point where that arrow hits the other side of the geometry, the other side of the structure, and it comes back toward us. And that's the feedback loop, right? So every time that feedback loop comes back toward us, we feel the frequency. We intake that same frequency that we put out, that same frequency that was forcing us to go into that job that we don't like, right? So we feel it twice. We feel it on the outward projection of that arrow of that frequency, and we feel it as it comes back into our bodies. So for every time, for every feedback loop, it intensifies. And that's what occurs also economically, right? For the longer that we desire to stay in a system that is not serving humanity, that is not serving the earth, what that feedback loop looks like is deterioration of the environment, right? Deterioration of the earth itself. And that looks like further mining, right? A lot of mining in many layers of many things. And we don't need to engage in that. We don't need to engage in that anymore. It's not necessary, but again, it's that cognitive dissonance, it's that pain that stands in between walking away from those patterns and starting anew. And I certainly have compassion for that. Because it can feel really scary. And I think that is one of I don't think that we could talk about this enough, because I think that the more that we share with one another our own experiences of walking away from a pattern that didn't serve us and being okay, the more that we help one another to be okay and to have the strength to walk away. I think the biggest fear that the mind certainly provides for us is the uncertainty of what's on the other side of that pattern. That pattern becomes so certain. Like, well, what is on the other side? You know?
Yeah, that question of what if really guides my curiosity. And it's also something that I think has prevented me from attaching to like a theory or a philosophy for too long, because I can go so far down a rabbit hole and then I'm always like, but what if? And my curiosity just always seems to just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, which I think is so important. And as you said, when we have these conversations and we give others the courage to see their possibilities and our realities, that even if it looks like your external world is shaking apart and breaking apart, like, you're going to be okay. And when the fear kicks in, it's having those tools and being able to build that self-trust to know that when everything's shaking apart, can you sit in it long enough for the storm to pass? Can you understand that you're just always in the center of your own storm, and this too shall pass? And the more you can sit in that and allow the chaos to dissolve around you, that breeds the loyalty and eventually the self-trust that we need to be able to birth these new systems into being. And I do love that you look at everything as economic, because everything really is about value, but not in the way that we've been indoctrinated into believing. Value is our intrinsic birthright. It's not something that is bestowed upon us. Yeah.
That's exactly right. We are the value. We are the value. And then the question becomes, how do we nurture that value? Right? We are the value. And so you switch that question from how valuable are we and how valuable is all of this which I have accumulated, to this is all intrinsically valuable. This is all intrinsically valuable. I am intrinsically valuable. And how do I best care for myself today? How do I best care for all of this which surrounds me today, right now? And that to me is very simple and it's very beautiful. And everything is economic. I think that, a lot of people perceive economics to be a system that also, like you mentioned with value, has been placed upon us. But really, what a powerful concept to embrace economics as our own projection of valuable, as our own projection of why we engage in these patterns that we've been talking about. Because really, it is us. It's the accumulative effect of all of our decisions, of all of our feedback loops, is economics. So it's just up to each and every one of us to shift our choices.
And it's coming out of that victim mindset as well, because we can sit here and complain about the 1% of the world that is oppressing everyone, but they can't be everywhere at once. They're literally a handful of people. It's our participation in it. We have made it manifest through our own sweat equity. The entire system exists through our own sweat equity. And something that came up for me a lot when I was working in finance and why I had to work away from it was I can't be a cog in this wheel. I can't continue to perpetuate this. But also, what have I learned? And in learning this, how can I Robin Hood this information in a way that allows others to be able to see that, oh, I helped create this. I need to actually take an honest accounting of what I do day in and day out and how I am creating the system that we're in. Like, we're on the precipice of another housing crash and market crash, but everyone's participated in it. And what, we're supposed to now sit back and point fingers and blame and then wonder why no one ever goes to jail or why there's never any restitution or justice served. It's like self-accountability, self-responsibility, honesty. And if you cannot get radically honest with yourself, like, it's a really good time to relieve yourself of the understanding or the belief that anyone else has the ability to be honest with you. Again, it's a reflection. So when we lack that ability to be radically honest with ourselves about exactly how we participate in the creation of this world, we're never going to see what we wish outside of ourselves, like ever, ever, ever.
Exactly. It's like, someone said recently that healing is actually the dissolution of the false self. Healing is actually the dissolution of the false self, which is that construct that we've created to support these feedback loops, right? To support these actions. And that's part of that pain that we feel. That's part of those experiences of the dark night of the soul, of these breakdowns. It's really breaking down the false self. So it feels like a death, right? It feels like walking through a death. And that's people get really, really, my daughter said yesterday, she said, death is my greatest fear. And I said, why? It's not real. And when she was 2 or 3, she would have agreed with me that it wasn't real, right? That death was not real because she still remembered. But as we move through our lives, we forget. We forget that death is only an illusion, and actually that when we do leave our bodies, if those feedback loops become so severe that we do return to the earth, that our bodies do return to the earth, right? We come back to those same patterns. We are reborn to the same patterns. So why not reform them now? Why not shift them now? Because just as much as death is not real, it's not an escape. It's not an escape from these patterns that have been forged into cellular memory, that have been, re-embodied by the earth. That's ancestral karma that keeps getting birthed over and over and over again until we take the initiative, until we exercise our will to change those patterns, right? They've got to be changed by us. They don't just disappear.
Well, what is it? Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed.
Right. We are the ones to transform that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not outside of us. And I know that you have an intimate experience with the concept of death and what that means in terms of not being the end of life. How How have your personal experiences kind of shaped this perspective that you hold right now? Because you're clearly a very multidimensional woman who's able to hold a very vast amount of perspectives at once and be able to kind of synthesize the world around you and integrate it quite well. What changed for you and allowed you to be able to kind of step into that knowing that you have?
I don't know what to call it, but people call it in your death experience. I had when I was around 7 years old, where I drowned. And then I had a second one a few years ago. And I think what happens when, in my experience, when we do leave our bodies in this way, when we do leave our bodies in this way and return, what happened to my perspective as I've integrated it over the last few years was really this integration of all of these dimensional levels. It was an integration of all these dimensional levels and also outside of the dimensions, to really be able to hold within myself the truth of how reality is created. It's sort of like if you're living inside of a box, if you're living inside of a box and you never peek outside of that box, right? Or you never transit outside of that box, all you know is the inside of the box. And those of us who have transited outside of the box and come back have a different perspective, right? And they're not all the same. Not all near death experiences. I haven't heard a lot of them. I don't tend to listen to a lot of near death experiences, but I think that they shape each and every one of us in a specific way. And the way that it shaped me was, number one, I have no fear of death because I know what happens, right? I've already experienced it. And I can also see how reality is created and what shapes what we perceive to be the future. And so one of my favorite things to do with people is to sit. I love to sit with people and I can see into their auric fields. I can see all the potentiality that exists around them. I can see that for them. And so it's a nice container to provide to someone to be able to say, well, this is some of the potentiality in your field right now. These are some of the areas that you could go. And that really helps to soften the mind's hold on, well, what exists beyond that doorway of death? What exists beyond that doorway of change? Because ultimately, these changes that we've been talking about in life, these pattern interrupts, right? They're all mini deaths. They're all mini deaths. And there's always something on the other side. And in my case, I came right back into this reality. I came right back into this reality in order to do exactly what I'm doing, in order to hold this perspective for myself and others. So as much as I like to do it on a macro sense and look at the potentiality collectively, which is a little tricky because we are in a state of great decentralization in experience, right? But I absolutely love to sit with people and to share with them what is actually in their field and what is desiring to be birthed through them. There is so much experience that desires to be birthed forth in every single one of us. And we have, some of us, I have sat with people that have so much ancestral energy around them. Their ancestors are just vying to be expressed. The passion of their ancestors, the gifts of their ancestors, the intentions of their ancestors that were never expressed are so incredibly strong, and they have such desire for expression. And it's like, if these people would just relaxed enough to allow it, they would see just how held they are. They would see just how held they are, how celebrated they are, how fortunate they are to be the creators of their experience.
When you're tapping into the auric field and looking for, as you said, that expression, are you witnessing the density that is preventing that expression to come through? And does that, we've spoken on a previous call, we were talking about like the tethers and the bonds and the cords that hold us, which is interesting when we look at the English language, because bonds are associated with debts and credits, and cords are associated with records. How does that play into the potentiality that you're able to witness in others?
Yeah, that's huge. Because so what these feedback loops I've been talking about, what they look like are, I mean, they're held in place by entities, right? They are held in place by entities. They're operate. They are. It's what I would call anima, like the animal kingdom. They're held in place by these entities that have a life of their own. Like they want to live. That entity, that energy, that is, for all intents and purposes of this conversation, it's taking from us, right? We perceive it to be taking from us. Well, it has a form of its own. It kind of has a life of its own. So it looks like a shadow figure. It takes on a particular form that I can see. And I could remove that. I can remove it. But that's not the best thing to do, is actually to illuminate its presence, right? Because we can bring a healer in that can remove something through the illumination of it. And then it's up to us to change our physical actions. It's up to us to change our physical actions. Otherwise, it will just come back. It could just come back. It's not a certainty, but it's upon us to change that which we are feeding into it. Right? If the food is still there, that energy, that blockage will just come right back, because it's fed by something, right? So yes, these exist. They are what we would perceive to be bondages, what we would perceive to be debts are just what we're carrying forward from the past and projecting into the future. Those are debts that we hold as expectations, as definitions about ourselves and other people.
And it's interesting because when you're talking about entities, my corporate brain is turning on, because when I was working in finance, I was working in entity management. And it was the formation of entities, the merging of entities, the renaming of entities, the active dissolution of entities. And the only way to make something go away was to dissolve it. You couldn't just let something go into bad standing. It's still sitting there with the state or with the jurisdiction that it's registered in. And it's really interesting when you start taking these corporate terms, which are just a reflection of this energetic field that we have. I was doing a talk the other day for a group, and we were talking about how the internal agreements create the external contracts. And we were talking about jurisdiction and what that looks like from an energetic standpoint. And then looking at capacity and the capacities that we hold in our lives, looking at all the titles that we assume, but also the parts of the soul that's been fragmented to create those capacities. And it's like, how do we collapse those into 0 point so that we are, as much as possible, showing up in a singular capacity in as many facets of our life as possible, but being aware of these hats that we wear at the soul level, how they become that in the civil. And it's just this wild conversation. And it's something that I do love to talk about. But when you're talking about entities, I see it in the civil realm, exactly how it's been constructed to reflect back to us at an internal level, at a soul level, those fragmentations.
That's exactly right. Because there is no separation. It just, oh my gosh, it's just so funny. Like, I was talking with another healer that said, he said, most people are run by most people are run by 3 or 4 entities, right? There's no one. That's when we get an NPC, or what we think of as a non-player character, because you're not playing your character. The entities are playing your character. You are being run by 3, 4, maybe even more entities, right? And we are the ones that are designed to be driving our car, right? And that's what we're learning to do. And I just see there's this image that I use sometimes of a car, and it has a bunch of different animals inside of the car, and they're like pouring out of the windows, and someone's at the wheel, and it's chaotic. And that is that's how a lot of people live their lives, right? Because they just don't know, we forget. So it's really amazing. It's really amazing how it all works, and exactly how it's reflected in the economic system, because there is no separation. There is no separation there.
No. And what's interesting about the entities is like some of the corporations that I was servicing, they had thousands of entities around the world. And the value of those entities was strictly on paper. To attempt to cash them in to get physical cash, like that would be interesting. It just becomes like this debt and credit system. It's basically just a ledger system that just moves things back and forth and back and forth. But it was always so fascinating to me to kind of witness how these were structured, and how there's always a parent at the top, but how those parents sat inside of trusts. And it all funnels back to the trust structure, which is at the top of the financial pyramid, if you will. There's always a trust at the top of at the absolute apex of the financial system of the world. There's a trust. And it's just so fascinating. And just, this is the information that is not readily available to us, but yet there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who work in the financial system that at any time could be like, oh, I know what that is. Like, it's right in front of them. They can see it day in and day out, but it's whether or not that level of awareness exists to be able to map it back to the personal experience. And this goes back to what we were discussing earlier, where, we create this reality. It's our active participation that makes this manifest and gives it legs. And we have the exact same ability to undo it as well through redirecting our attention, which is our intrinsic value. Our attention and what we put it on is one of our most valuable assets, if not the most valuable asset. And it's just that redirection fundamentally shifts the economic scales and balances of power.
That's exactly right. Our intention is our currency. Our attention is our currency, right? Our intention, our intention to create, that is our currency. And it's up to us what frequencies that we desire to work with, right? If we allow these entities to run our lives and to dictate to us what we quote unquote must do, it's as if the entities are co-creating with the mind and we are some sort of passive observer. We don't really want to do that, right? We don't really want to be in that space. Most people would probably choose something different. So we've got to be the ones to be running our show. We've got to be the ones that are driving our cars. And there's a way to do that, right? There is a way to do that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because you're saying this. And the other thing that's coming up for me that I was diving into quite a bit during the sovereign process, when you're looking at corporations outside of you, because during the pandemic, it became very relevant to people, where they were like, look at what these businesses are doing to us. But a business, again, an entity, is just a piece of paper. It's the men or women, the souls that animate that piece of paper, that make it true. And going down this rabbit hole of substance animating form, because there only ever is substance. The form, the vessel, the meat sack that we're in, the pieces of paper that we give so much power to, there is a substance that is animating that, or else it cannot be, it cannot exist. And again, that substance, you have to know as best as possible what that substance is. And as you said, there's the entity in front of us, that's the form. And then there's also the entity that is the substance that is animating that form. And this is the rabbit hole that I go down and can geek out on for hours, because I just find it so fascinating. Because it is all just energy, frequency, and vibration. That's it.
I love that you brought that up, and I share that fascination. It's like when people, like I'm in Oregon right now, and I'm pretty close to the city of Portland, and that is an area where we have a lot of vacant commercial buildings. And it's like, why are these buildings vacant, right? What are they being held by? And it's like they're being held by an entity called a special purpose vehicle, right? They're being held by an SPV with many layers of securitization. And the value is undoubtedly inflated. It hasn't been reduced by a number of different reasons and definitions. It's like, why? And as you said, people would point to the paperwork and they would point to the rules and all of these other things, but really it's the people. It's the people, it's the focus, it's the belief that is animating these papers, these rules, this perception of truth and logic that is holding these buildings captive, right? When we have so many homeless people on the streets. In Portland, we have a great deal of homelessness, and we also have a great deal of vacant buildings, which are only falling into greater and greater disrepair. So really, it's up to us to let certain things go, just like in the mind. It's like it's present to let these very rigid definitions, beliefs go in order to get to the other side of the pattern. We are the ones bringing life to it.
Yeah, we're in this interesting season of harvest almost. And the harvest can go both ways. It's either the energy harvesting that's occurring through our over attachment to these constructs and beliefs and structures and systems that are outside of us, or there's the harvesting of the entities inside of our field that can create the pathways for us to sow new life moving forward. And it's something that I've been contemplating quite a bit lately, because as you said, and I'm glad you brought up the special purpose vehicles too, because that's a lot of people that listen to me will understand what you're talking about. But even just in the language, special purpose vehicle, like there's so much intention when you really start to dig into the English language, which has been created, I believe, to confuse us. It's there to confuse us. It's there to create the assumptions that allow us to believe something to be true, but not necessarily factually be true. But even then, what are facts? Right?
Exactly.
What are facts?
Exactly.
That's still a man-made construct. And this is where it gets really interesting. And even during the trust work, where a lot of it was relying on a lot of biblical principles, it feels like we're always just kind of playing this game of two truths and a lie, where we can have something in front of us that's like a man-made construct, and it can be rife with truth, but then there's still going to be some lies in there as well. We're going to evade the facts, because anything created is created through that loop of kind of perception, perspective, and projection. Through your experience and your ability to kind of transcend the box, as you said, and really tap into the multi-dimensionality that we are, we really have to learn how to find that for ourselves, to really tap in and trust within ourselves that we can pull down and reach for the information that we need whenever we need it. And that's so long as we are still reaching to these man-made constructs. Yes, will it kind of give us a stepping stone out? But again, if we want to go back to something like the Bible or biblical principles, there's 3 different books in the Bible. There's the book of Judges, the book of Isaiah, and the book of Jeremiah that explicitly outline men that rose to the occasion, that appeared to have everyone's best interest at heart, recreated the cycles that they were trying to escape. It happened within like 5 to 7 generations. So I'm very aware of that through the creation of these parallel systems and societies, that yes, we can create them, but are they being created through this activated nervous system? Are they being created through this cellular memory that we're unaware of? Are we creating this and also imprinting in the future generations? If we're creating it through fear, and through creating like escape hatches, as I like to say, that's being imprinted non-verbally and energetically in the following generations, who are going to be doomed to recreate it again. So it's just, I don't know the answer. Like, I don't know the answer to it, but I'm so curious and fascinated by what we all hold inherently and individually within our own kind of energetic power, to be able to curb everything that's happening. But again, it's going to take some cycle. I don't want to come back. I don't want to do this again if I don't have to, unless it's in my ancestry to do it. Like, I don't want to have to do this again. I want to learn my lessons. I want to exercise my free will in a way that serves humanity to the highest and greatest good, without creating more karma for myself. But who knows?
Oh yeah, gosh, I love everything you said. It's it's like why we're always recreating from the cellular memory, and that's why, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there that I'd love to talk about another time. But I feel like what is present for us now, you mentioned facts, and ultimately we wake up and we project these realities over and over and over again, right? We project the ghosts, we project the ghostbusters, we project the same problems, we project all of this through the filtration system of belief, right? All of these fractals, we have fractals and we have waves. Like, I can see the fractals in people's auric fields. Like, the fractals hold what I referred to as the entities, the beliefs hold the entities. Our trust in the belief empowers them. And so I think we also have one of my friends I was talking to yesterday, a colleague of mine, he was talking about, he likes to use the term imaginal cells. He said, some of us are here as imaginal cells. We are here to imagine a new way of being. And I wonder, are we really imagining a new way of being, or are we actually capable of remembering a way of being that used to exist? You know, maybe some of us are here with these memories, with this imagination of places like Lemuria, Atlantis, you know, with this high technology that many have been gifted through their cellular memory, through their DNA expression, right? We are just as capable of creating that which inspires us, as we are capable of creating that which would have dominion over us, right? So we can create that. We are empowered to create that. And there are beings here now who have these gifts, who have these memories, right? So we can create this. We can really exist at the timelines that we are capable of pulling down.
You just touched on something as well that's been popping up for me a lot. And it is that idea of dominion, and something that came up frequently. And I even kind of taught it. And I look at it now and I'm like, oh, I think I need to track that back. Is God, God, grantor of dominion. Like, is that true? I don't know that it's the grantor of dominion. I've been imbued with dominion. Was it actually granted to me? And in believing I was granted that dominion, by this all-seeing God who we all embody in one way, shape, or form, the energy of creation. We are creators. That's a construct I'm unraveling right now, for myself, because I believe that for me is still a limiting belief that keeps me locked in a timeline and a dimension that doesn't serve my highest and greatest good.
Yes, that's so well stated. we are the grantors of dominion, because one of my friends and I have been having this conversation quite a bit, the way that we have the opportunity to perceive those around us as brand new in any moment. And there's a lot to that, right? When we perceive someone, when we truly perceive someone as brand new, we're not bringing forward any definitions about who that person is, because it is the definitions, it is the boxes, all of these fractals, these beliefs that we hold around those around us that limit and filter the energy that is capable of coming through that being as an expression that we are co-creating with, right? So we are the grantors of dominion. We place dominion in these boxes, in these fractals, and these beliefs around those who surround us, on a micro scale, in our intimate relationships, and what we perceive to be a macro scale. As you mentioned, the 1%. We are the ones granting, through our beliefs, through our definitions, a dominion that could be placed upon us. That there could be a few people in the world that are that are running things, right? It's very convenient. It's very convenient.
Absolutely. And it's a big statement to make. And it is also something that religion and even Christianity, and anyone who believes in a God, like choose your God across all denominations, all religions, all identities, to step outside of that and really say, well, I am my own grantor of dominion, which kind of implies that you're saying I am God. That's a big statement to make for a lot of those groups. And as we're watching this kind of rise of Christianity right now come to the forefront through what we're witnessing happen in society, it's a very audacious statement, and I'm happy that we've made it, because I do believe that it's a seed that needs to be implanted just so that people can think a little bigger when it comes to what our role is in this space-time continuum.
Oh yeah, we are all empowered we are all created in the image of God. That is stated for a reason, is we all have this creative ability, right? We all have this creative ability. So that it really demystifies anyone that would try to point a finger back toward us and say, well, God says this and God says that. And it's like, really? You said that. You're saying this and you are saying that. That I don't agree, right? I don't agree. And I have the power to not agree.
Absolutely. And that's the free will. Oh my gosh, I could talk to you for hours. Now you were saying that you work with people to untangle their auric field and to get a clearer sense of self. Who tends to find you, and how can they find you?
I will put a link. I will send you a link to my calendar, and people can book a consultation there. That is the best way. And they can also read my Substack, and I will put a link to that. And yes, that is my favorite thing to do, other than nerding out on the same topics we've been talking about. I absolutely, oh my gosh, it is the best thing to sit with someone and really be a mirror to what they perceive to be going on in their own reality, in their own life, through pointing out, back to them what energies are desiring to work through them. Just like we talked about our ability to be those imaginal selves, our ability to bring forward the goodness, right? The happiness, the joy that desires to express through us, these talents and abilities. I love to empower people to do that, right? To step into those new patterns, because all of us, if we had a little sneak preview, if we had that sneak preview of what laid beyond the veil, gosh, I mean, it makes things a lot easier to step through the veil. It makes it a lot easier to step through the veil if you have an idea of what's on the other side waiting for you.
That's beautiful. And I think that is a wonderful note to conclude this conversation on, but I look forward to having many more with you. This was just beautiful to be able to sit down and share this time together.
Thank you so much. I agree.
We barely scratched the surface in this conversation, which to some may feel like a more advanced teaching, and to others, you may be going, where's the rest of it? And I look forward to the day where Allison and I can sit down again and dive a little deeper into some of the topics that we just barely scratched the surface on, and do a deeper exploration into the weaving of our created reality and the consciousness that governs it. And right now, while my portal is designed to connect soulpreneurs to be able to communicate and collaborate and put their medicine into the world in a way that feels aligned, there is a much larger financial paradigm shift sitting behind it that will further bridge the old and the new by honoring the wholeness of our being while still holding us fully accountable and responsible for how we choose to show up in this world. It's a large vision, and I always feel so honored, blessed, and grateful when I can meet other men and women like Allison who have the capacity to envision and hold these big ideas and what's possible to move humanity forward. As always, thank you so much for being here. Until next time, I love you.